Hello, everyone. It's Tuesday, and we're back to reading The Book Thief. We are on Liesel's lecture. Exactly what kind of people Hans and Rosa Huberman were was not the easiest problem to solve. Kind people? Ridiculously ignorant people? People of questionable sanity. What was easier to define was their predicament. So the situation of Hans and Rosa Huberman, very sticky indeed. In fact, frightfully sticky. When a Jew shows up at your place of residence in the early hours of morning, in the very birthplace of Nazism, you're likely to experience extreme levels of discomfort. Anxiety, disbelief, paranoia. Each plays its part, and each leads to a sneaking suspicion that a less than heavenly consequence awaits. The fear is shiny, ruthless in the eyes. The surprising point to make is that despite the iridescent fear glowing as it did in the dark, they somehow resisted the urge for hysteria. Mama ordered Liesel away. Bet, Samach! The voice calm but firm, highly unusual. Papa came in a few minutes later and lifted the covers of the vacant bed. Alles good, Liesel. Is everything good? Yes, Papa. As you can see, we have a visitor. She could only just make out the shape of Hans Huberman's tallness in the dark. He'll sleep in here tonight. Yes, Papa. A few minutes later, Max Vandenberg was in the room, noiseless and opaque. The man did not breathe, he did not move, yet somehow he traveled from the doorway to the bed and was under the covers. Everything good? It was Papa again, talking to Max, this time to Max. The reply floated from his mouth, then molded itself like a stain to the ceiling. Such was his feeling of shame. Yes, thank you. He said it again when Papa made his way over to his customary position in the chair next to Lisa's bed. Thank you. And now another hour passed before Lisa fell asleep. She slept hard and long. A hand woke her just after 8:30 the next morning. The voice at the end of it informed her that she would not be attending school that day. Apparently, she was sick. When she awoke completely, she watched a stranger in the bed opposite. The blanket showed only a nest of lopsided hair at the top, and there was not a sound, as if he'd somehow trained himself even to sleep more quietly. With great care, she walked the length of him, following Papa to the hall. For the first time ever, the kitchen and Mama were dormant. It was a kind of bemused inaugural silence. To Lisa's relief, it lasted only a few minutes. There was food and the sound of eating. Mama announced the day's priority. She sat at the table and said, "Now listen, Liesel. Papa's going to tell you something today." This was serious. She didn't even say Samich. It was a personal feat of abstinence. He'll talk to you and you have to listen. Is that clear? The girl was still swallowing. Is that clear, Samich? That was better. The girl nodded. When she re entered the bedroom to fetch her clothes, the body in the opposite bed had turned and curled up. It was no longer in a straight log, but a kind of Z shape, reaching diagonally from corner to corner, zigzagging the bed. She could see his face now in the tired light. His mouth was open, and his skin was the color of eggshells. Whiskers coated his jaw and chin, and his ears were hard and flat. He had a small but misshapen nose. Liesel! She turned. Move it! She moved to the washroom. Once changed into the hallway, she realized she would not be traveling far. Papa was standing in front of the door to the basement. He smiled very faintly, lit the lamp, and led her down. Among the mounds of drop sheets and smell of paint, Papa told her to make herself comfortable. Ignited on the walls were the painted words learned in the past. I need to tell you some things. These were sat on top of a meter tall heap of drop sheets. Papa on a 15-liter paint can. For a few minutes he searched for the words. When they came, he stood to deliver them. He rubbed his eyes. Liesel, he said quietly, I was never sure if any of this would happen, so I never told you. About me, about the man upstairs. He walked from one end of the basement to the other, the lamplight magnifying his shadow. It turned him into a giant on the wall, walking back and forth. When he stopped pacing, his shadow loomed behind him, watching. Someone was always watching. You know my accordion, he said, and there the story begins. He explained World War I and Eric Vandenberg, and then the visit to the fallen soldier's wife. The boy who came into the room that day is the man upstairs. Verstest, understand? The book thief sat and listened to Hans Huberman's story. It lasted a good hour, until the moment of truth, which involved a very obvious and necessary lecture. Liesel, you must listen. Papa made her stand up and held her hand. They faced the wall. Dark shapes and the practice of words. Firmly he held her fingers. Remember the Fuhrer's birthday? When we walked home from the fire that night? Remember what you promised me? The girl concurred. To the wall she said that I would keep a secret. That's right. Between the hand-holding shadows, the painted words were scattered about, perched on their shoulders, resting on their heads, and hanging from their arms. Liesel, if you tell anyone about the man up there, we will all be in big trouble. He walked the fine line of scaring her into oblivion and soothing her enough to keep her calm. He fed her the sentences and watched with his metallic eyes, desperation and placidity. At the very least, Mama and I will be taken away. Hans was clearly worried that he was on the verge of frightening her too much, but he calculated the risk, preferring to err on the side of too much fear rather than not enough. The girl's compliance had to be an absolute, immutable fact. Toward the end, Hans Huberman looked at Liesel Meminger and made certain she was focused. He gave her a list of consequences. If you tell anyone about the man, her teacher, Rudy, didn't matter whom. What mattered was that all were punishable. For starters, he said, I will take each and every one of your books, and I will burn them. It was callous. I'll throw them in the stove or the fireplace. He was certainly acting like a tyrant, but it was necessary. Understand? The shock made a hole in her very neat, very precise. Tears welled. Yes, Papa. Next, he had to remain hard, and he needed to strain for it. They'll take you away from me. Do you want that? She was crying now in earnest. 9. Good. His grip on her hand tightened. They'll drag that man up their way, and maybe Mama and me too, and we will never, ever come back. That did it. The girl began to sob so uncontrollably that Papa was dying to pull her into him and hug her tight. He didn't. Instead, he squatted down and watched directly in the eyes. He unleashed his quietest words so far. Verstehst du mich? Do you understand me? The girl nodded. She cried, and now defeated, broken, her papa held her in the painted air and the kerosene light. I understand, Papa. I do. Her voice was muffled against his body, and they stayed like that for a few minutes. Liesel with squashed breath and Papa rubbing her back. Upstairs, when they returned, they found Mama sitting in the kitchen, alone and pensive. When she saw them, she stood and beckoned Liesel to come over, noticing the dried up tears that streaked her. She brought the girl into her and heaped a typically rugged embrace around her body. Alles gut, Samich? She didn't need an answer. Everything was good, but it was awful, too. The Sleeper. Max Vandenberg slept for 3 days. In certain excerpts of that sleep, Liesel watched him. You might say that by the 3rd day it became an obsession to check in on him, to see if he was still breathing. She could now interpret his signs of life from the movement of his lips, his gathering beard, and the twigs of hair then moved ever so slightly when his head twitched in the dream state. Often, when she stood over him, there was the mortifying thought that he had just woken up. His eyes splinted open to view her, to watch her watching. The idea of being caught out plagued and enthused her at the same time. She dreaded it. She invited it. Only when Mama called out to her could she drag herself away, simultaneously soothed and disappointed that she might not be there when he woke. Sometimes, close to the end of the marathon of sleep, he spoke. There was a recital of murmured names, a checklist: Isaac, Aunt Ruth, Sarah, Mama, Walter, Hitler, family, friend, enemy. They were all under the covers with him, and at one point he appeared to be struggling with himself. 9, he whispered. It was repeated 7 times. No. Liesl, in the act of watching, was already noticing the similarities between the stranger and herself. They both arrived in a state of agitation on Himmel Street. They both nightmared. When the time came, he awoke with a nasty thrill of disorientation. His mouth opened a moment after his eyes, and he sat up, right angled. I. A patch of voice escaped his mouth. When he saw the upside-down face of a girl above him, there was the fretful moment of unfamiliarity and the grasp for recollection to decode exactly where and when he was currently sitting. After a few seconds, he managed to scratch his head, the rustle of kindling, and he looked at her. His movements were fragmented, and now that they were open, his eyes were swampy and brown, thick and heavy. As a reflex action, Liesl backed away. She was too slow. The stranger reached out, his bed-warmed hand taking her by the forearm. Please. His voice also held on, as if possessing fingernails. He pressed it into her flesh. Papa! Loud. Please. Soft. It was late afternoon, gray and gleaming, but it was only dirty colored light that was permitted entrance into the room. It was all the fabric the curtains they allowed. If you're optimistic, think of it as bronze. When Papa came in, he first stood in the doorway and witnessed Max Vandenberg's gripping fingers and his desperate face. Both held on to Liesl's arms. I see you two have met, he said. Max's fingers started cooling. So that's today's reading. We'll talk to you again on Wednesday. Have a good day.